Utah is home to some of the most visited and picturesque national parks in the U.S. As two Floridians who haven't spent much time out west, we decided it was finally time to cross a few new states off our list on our goal to visit all 50. In September of 2024, we set off on an adventurous road trip that began with a flight into Salt Lake City, with a plan to visit two of Utah's Mighty Five national parks, as well as Monument Valley in Arizona, and the southwest corner of Colorado.
In this video, we will share our trip to Bryce Canyon and Zion National Park, but before we hit the highway, we wanted to make a stop for something that we can't get back home: In-N-Out. This was almost certainly the most picturesque drive-thru we've ever been in, but hot take, we didn't love it. If you're from the area, let us know what your usual In-N-Out order is in the comment. We also wanted to stop by a little unique spot outside of the Salt Lake City area.
The real-life Up House is built as an exact replica of the house featured in the movie. It is someone's private residence, so they do ask that you keep your visit brief, and I'll link their website down below so that you can read their rules if you'd like to visit. But as two people who love adventures just like Carl and Ellie, this was a fun spot to visit. Our next stop on the way was into Provo Canyon. This area is one of the first spots in Utah to see fall colors, and we were hoping to catch a glimpse before we headed into Bryce Canyon, which we knew wouldn't have much fall color to speak of.
We also stopped here to see Bridal Veil Falls, different than the one in Yosemite, but still impressive at 607 feet tall, falling into the Provo River. This was also a great stop because you can literally see the waterfall from the parking lot. You can walk across a short bridge to get a very up close and personal view. The rest of the drive to Bryce Canyon was an ever-evolving landscape of mountain views and rolling hills. The drive is about 4 hours, but since we made multiple stops, it took us most of the afternoon.
If you are approaching Bryce Canyon from the west or north, you will most likely drive through Red Canyon on Scenic Byway 12. This area falls under the National Forest Service, so there is no admission fee to enter, and we saw a lot of information saying this might be a better option for camping if you are having trouble finding reservations at the national park. Hotels and traditional lodging is also a little difficult to come by closer to Bryce. There are a few options outside of the park, and then there is the actual lodge inside the park, but that can be pretty expensive, especially during busy season.
We opted to stay at the Best Western Plus Ruby's Inn. Best Westerns are all independently franchised and operated, so sometimes you'll find yourself in a historic or iconic local hotel branded as a Best Western. It seems like this is a way that a lot of small local brands find help with managing their bookings and marketing. The Cowboy Buffet and Steak Room is open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and is usually pretty busy. The price was sort of reasonable for a touristy area, but the food was not much to write home about.
The hotel is named after the historic Ruby Inn, which began operating in 1919. The hotel today is run by the children and grandchildren of the original owner. The room was basic but fit our needs for the one night that we were here. The one thing we thought was weird was how small the pillows on the bed were, but maybe that's how they had them in the 1920s. We did like the historic photos in the room, which was a nice touch from the area. Just a little before sunset, we headed over to the park. Admission to the national park is $35, and it is usually good for up to 3 days in a row. Because of the different trips that we had planned this year, which included Bryce Canyon, Zion, and later this year, the Grand Canyon, we got the America the Beautiful Pass, which is good for 12 months and costs $80. So after 3 park visits, it is a good deal for the year.
Despite being specifically named Sunrise and Sunset Point, these are great spots for watching either the sunrise or the sunset from either location. This area is also the starting point for some of the park's most popular hikes. Because our visit was short, we didn't have a lot of time for different hikes, so we chose the Queen's Garden Trail, which is considered the least difficult of the trails descending from the rim into Bryce Canyon Amphitheater. The elevation here is about 6,000 feet, so it definitely was higher than we are used to, so that added a little bit of difficulty to the hike.
The main draw to Bryce Canyon is the visually striking, iconic hoodoos, the tall, thin spires of rock that rise dramatically from the canyon floor. Despite its name, Bryce Canyon is not technically a canyon, but a series of natural amphitheaters. The geology of Bryce Canyon is predominantly shaped by the sedimentary rock formations deposited 40 to 50 million years ago. These layers consist of limestone, mudstone, and siltstone, which were laid down in a vast freshwater lake environment. The pink, red, and orange hues of the rock layers are attributed to varying amounts of iron and magnesium oxides.
The hoodoos formed from a combination of weathering and erosion processes. You wouldn't think this area would see much snow, but due to the higher elevation, the winters here are pretty cold and contribute to the freeze-thaw cycles where water enters the cracks in the rock, freezes, and expands, causing the rocks to break apart. Over time, these processes sculpt the irregular spires, fins, and hoodoos for which the area is famous.
After the hike, we headed to the visitor center to pick up our magnet souvenir, and we always like to read a little bit of the educational info they have here. Bryce Canyon's high elevation, clean air, and remote location create some of the darkest skies in the country. We were able to see the Milky Way the first night that we were in the park, and although our astrophotography skills need a little work, we still captured some incredible images.
The main road through the park continues for another 15 miles along the southern scenic drive until it ends at the park's highest elevations at Rainbow and Yovimpa points. Along the way, we also stopped at Inspiration Point, which has some of the most spectacular views of the hoodoos. Our trip was in September, and this is towards the end of the busy season. We still found the park full of people, but it was not overly crowded to the point where we weren't able to enjoy ourselves. So, if you have the flexibility of travel time, I definitely suggest more of the shoulder season for a visit.
In the late afternoon of day 2, we left Bryce Canyon and headed towards Zion. A little more than halfway between the two, you'll find Mount Carmel Junction. This is where we stopped for dinner, especially after spotting a sign announcing that there were homemade pies here. It is a quirky diner-style restaurant inside a Best Western, believe it or not, but they have a fun story about a sign the owner's husband made during World War II. And due to the lumber shortages, he ran out of wood and couldn't finish the sign, so instead of saying home, it only said ho. But they decided that with people's accents, it basically sounded the same anyways.
The rest of the drive only took us about 20 minutes, during which time we spotted a herd of bison, which are not naturally in this area like they are in Yellowstone, but these were in a ranch just beside the highway, and it was still pretty cool to see them all headed in for the evening. We, of course, had to stop by the park sign to grab a photo, and then enter the park. Zion sees over 4.5 million visitors per year, and it is immediately evident why. The landscape here is unlike anything we had ever seen before.
Zion has a lot more hotels and restaurants available in the area than Bryce Canyon does, but we opted for an Air BNB here, which helped us save a little bit of money over some of the hotel options. We got in late the night before, so we came in and dumped all our stuff everywhere before we were able to film, so there aren't any good clips of the bed or bathroom, but I'll link the listing below if you're looking for somewhere to stay while in Zion. It was quite nice and came with a little kitchen-y area to help maybe have a few meals in to save a little more. The host also offered tons of tips and answered a few questions as we were in the planning phases.
We saved another $35 on admission with our America the Beautiful pass. A word of caution for Zion: Zion is busy. Very busy in the summer months, but even still pretty busy during the lower season, like when we were here. Expect waits, traffic, and crowds most of the time. They have also implemented a bus system, but a little bit more about that later. For our first hike, we were able to get an early start and grab a parking spot near the trailhead. This is the Canyon Overlook Trail, a moderate 1 mile out and back trail. This is considered a moderate trail due to the elevation gain and a somewhat uneven terrain.
We had hiking poles for this hike, which were originally bought for a later hike in the Narrows, but we were glad to have them with us on this hike as well. The hike culminates in the view of Zion Canyon, and it is really the first time you could feel the true scale of this area. For our second hike of the day, we headed back to the visitor center and got on the park shuttle. The shuttle system in Zion is provided to reduce traffic in the park, especially given the limited parking in most of the trailheads. And during the busy season, the canyon drive is closed to private vehicles altogether. We studied the shuttle map and schedule before we went in order to understand our route, but it was pretty easy. We got on at the visitor center and we got off at the last stop, the Temple of Sinawava.
The Temple of Sinawava is the furthest stop down the canyon on the shuttle and is the only pathway to take to hike the Narrows. The hike begins with the Riverside Walk, a paved trail about 2.2 miles round trip. At the midpoint of the hike, you can begin your hike into the Narrows. Even if you aren't planning to hike the Narrows, this is a great hike to get a sense of the narrowing canyon walls. Hiking the Narrows is considered a bucket list item for a lot of visitors to Zion, and that was definitely true for us. This hike is considered strenuous on the National Park Service website, and it's crucially important to make sure you have the right gear and know the current weather conditions for the area. The risk of flash flooding is very high during the rainy season.
But I consider this kind of a choose-your-own-adventure hike. Once you enter the river, you can go as far as you are comfortable with, and if that's only 100 yards, you still got the experience of hiking in the river. I had read online that walking in the river was like walking on wet bowling balls, and that was the perfect description for what it was like. We used our hiking poles for stability, and we had our hiking boots with ankle support. We also bought neoprene socks on Amazon before the trip to help keep some water out. Our feet were absolutely soaked by the end, but that was kind of what we expected, so it wasn't too bad. There are also outfitters in town that rent gear for the Narrows, so if you don't already have sturdy boots or hiking poles, you can rent them while you're here. Thank you for joining us on this week's video. We hope you learned a little bit and have some new inspiration for a trip to Utah. Next week, we continue our adventures into Arizona with a stop in Monument Valley. Consider subscribing to the channel so that you can follow along on that next journey.